Hey, it's Mitch with Camera.
And I'm Kyle.
And we're here at Thunder Valley, a dirt bike track, and we're going to test the A9 Mark II against the original A9, and we're going to talk with Kyle, who's a working sports photographer. It was almost 3 years ago when the Sony a9 came out, and it was Sony's first mirrorless sports camera, and it really matched, and it sometimes exceeded some of the capabilities of the flagship models from Canon and Nikon. Now, about 3 years later, we have a refined version of the A9 that doesn't have groundbreaking new specs, but it's definitely a better camera. So when it comes to changes on the A9 II versus the original A9, well, we still have a 24 megapixel stacked image sensor with 693 phase detect autofocus points to go across the whole frame, and that gives us that crazy awesome autofocus that this camera has. And we still have 60 calculations per second for auto exposure and autofocus, but we do have an updated BIONZ X processor, which is supposed to give us more stable autofocus performance and give us a better viewfinder experience, although it is not a different viewfinder, and I'm super bummed about that. But using it today already, it looks a little bit better. I'm not sure what's different, but it is slightly nicer. One of Sony's main focuses for improving this camera body was in the realm of connectivity. That might sound a little boring to a lot of us, like who cares, right? But for sports photographers, that's really important. They need to transfer files really fast. And in this camera, they've updated the new Ethernet port from 100 gigabit to 1000 gigabit. And we have a new wireless LAN chip inside, and that's going from 2.4 gigahertz to 5 gigahertz. That's really going to help them out there when they're shooting and trying to transfer images, and they need to put those up on the internet really fast. Another thing that might seem boring to a lot of shooters is the addition of voice memos. Now, if I take a photo, I can add a voice message to that image and say, if this guy just won this race and I took a beautiful photo of him, I could say, race winning lap photo. And then that photo can be sent to an editor and he'll know what's going on. Additionally with that is if I send that picture through the app, the Imaging Edge app from Sony, it'll actually convert that audio file into text so people can just read what it says. Another thing they improved on this camera is the IBIS, the internal image stabilization. Other brands have been doing it a little bit better, like Panasonic and Olympus, and Sony says they've improved it on this body. So far I don't notice a massive difference, but I am using a 100 to 400 millimeter lens. It's kind of hard to stabilize in the first place. We'll just take their word for it. It might be a little bit better. On paper, of course, this camera looks like it does circles around the competition, but that changes when you get into the real world. And to talk about that, we're going to talk to Kyle, who actually uses it in the real world. So you were using this last night at a hockey rink, and you were using Sony's 100 to 400 GM, which is a 5.6 at its longest end.
Right.
And so how was the ISO in the dark?
That was like what I kind of wanted to go into the Pepsi Center and shoot with, to see how high I can really get the ISO.
Yeah.
I didn't go 10,000, I just have a problem shooting 10,000 ISO. I think it's just like, you know, a normal photographer is not going to be like, oh crap. But there are places, you know, that you do end up shooting 10,000 ISO. I kind of stuck to 5,000, 6,400. And you know, when I'm cropping and zooming in the viewfinder, it looks pretty clean. You put them on the screen, and they're pretty clean. The JPEGs on Sony are really great.
Yeah.
And noise reduction in Lightroom or Capture One is going to do a pretty decent job cleaning up. But when you're transmitting images, you're not usually shooting raw. You might be recording raw to another card so you can edit and post later.
And now we've got two UHS 2 card slots.
Super important.
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. Now you don't, if you're using two cards, you're not limited to the slowest one if you're writing to two at the same time. Was there anything you didn't like when you were shooting last night?
I didn't like the way the camera was set up when I started using it, and then you just have to go find out what you do like. The responsiveness of the autofocus tracking, there's like a limit between 1 and 5, and at 1, you know, it was just like stuck on the player, and that was great. But at the same time, I wanted it to find the next player without me having to refocus, and that was the problem. So once you change that, you know, it was really easy to use. The grip feels great. If you're using the A9 Mark II compared to the Mark I, the grip is like a total game changer. You even have room for your pinky depending on how big your hand is. A lot of people still want to use that grip for the extra battery life and the vertical shooting, but for the most part, you know, I love the grip change on the Mark II and the Mark IV, and then the autofocus, the back button autofocus button, I think is in a much better position.
bigger too.
It's bigger too. Yeah, it's bigger. And then you've got the lock on the exposure compensation. That's nice. And then even the back wheel here is not in the body anymore. It's on top of the body, and I feel like that gives you a little easier access. One thing I would kind of like is maybe a lock button, so I stop moving my focus button.
Yeah. What was your favorite part about it?
I don't know. It's just the tack sharp images all in a row. Like, you know, it's like brr, 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 brr. It's great for social. You see a lot of photographers turning a set of 60 images now into GIFs, and that's all over social media. You could do that with a Canon, but you're gonna miss a couple times.
Yeah.
And when this thing locks onto a face, it's not letting go.
So Sony does claim that the autofocus stability has improved on the A9 Mark II. And we have an A9, the original one, with us, and the A9 Mark II, which Kyle is using. And we both have identical lenses. We're going to shoot at 400 millimeters right down this straightaway in continuous autofocus at 20 frames per second and see if they really feel that much different. All right, so we've had a lot of time to shoot these bikers out here, and it's been really fun. How do you feel overall shooting today with that, the A9 II?
I really like the A9 II. I think the autofocus kept up as expected. I'm not 100% sure if it was any quicker than the original A9. 20 frames a second in general is going to make anything else that you use like obsolete. And so like coming from a Canon, which is like 12, 14 frames a second, so something that's shooting 20 frames a second with no blackout is just like insane.
The no blackout, which makes it so much easier to track. I'm not even a sports photographer, and I feel like I got some really great images.
Yeah, I mean, out here, an A9 II is like the camera to have, or an A9, either one. But if you needed to send images and voice memo, and I think that's what the A9 II is. It's an upgraded version of the A9 for a specific shooter, and those are photojournalists, sports journalists that need to send photos on the wire to other different publications. And so they got what they needed. The cool thing is, I bet you Sony comes out in a couple months or a year or two with an update for the A9 II that just keeps advancing any of the stuff that we will end up complaining about later on.
And if you're not a professional sports photographer or professional event photographer and you just want the best autofocus, the original A9 is going to go down in price a little bit, and that's still going to be a rocking camera.
Right.
And we've been out in the dust, we've been getting dirt shoved in our face. I feel like the weather sealing on both these bodies is pretty good. Definitely better on the A9 Mark II with the rubber doors, there's visible weather sealing on it, but this one's full of dust too, and I feel fine. Overall, I think we've had a really good experience with both of these cameras out here. And now we really just want to get back and take a look at some of the images and go over the autofocus tests and see if maybe we're wrong and the A9 II is actually just a hair better.
Alright, so we're going to take a look at some of our favorite images from that day, and we're going to just kind of look at some high ISOs and stuff, and you were able to get this one. This one looks great to me. Why don't you tell us a little bit about some of those?
Yeah, it was really good light. I was shooting at 2000 ISO, a little higher than I probably should have been at that time of day with the type of light that we had, but I kind of just wanted to see, what a higher ISO and good light would look like, and there's not much noise at all. The detail stays. It's nice and tack sharp. We were really close to those guys, so 100 to 400 might have been a little too much of a lens, but you can never have too much of a lens sometimes. And if we go back and look at the hockey that I shot the night before, this was with the autofocus at 5000 ISO, 12/50th of a second at 6.3. It's nice and sharp. The noise reduction is going to even clean up even more. I really enjoyed shooting this with the available light in the Pepsi Center. This image is cropped quite a bit, still pretty clean, and it tracked the action too. There's a lot of action around a goalie during a hockey game, and when you are shooting it, the tracking on one subject is really great. It doesn't interfere with anyone passing in front of you. So I was really impressed with the low light capabilities at high ISOs inside the Pepsi Center. If we go real quick to one more, that a goal celebration coming down the line, down the bench after he scores. I just took a bunch of photos in a row just to see how it would keep up in a lower light situation. Obviously he did a great job. Nice and sharp, 6400 ISO here, so definitely usable, and I think this camera is gonna make a lot of sports photographers happy. So
Yeah, ultimately, overall, the A9 Mark II is just the upgrade that sports photographers needed. The A9, the original one, it had the autofocus, it had all the new tech bells and whistles and everything, but it just lacked that refinement that the A9 II brings to the table now. And it meets and exceeds all your needs if you're a professional sports photographer at this point. So it's a great improvement from Sony.
We wanted to thank Jeff from Sony for getting us the body for a week to play around with. You know, super grateful that we get access to this gear so we can do reviews, and we love all the feedback we're getting from everyone who's subscribed and watched, and you know, giving Mitch a hard time for being just out of 6th grade. So funny. But thanks for watching. Like, subscribe if you love watching what we're doing, and we enjoy the support. See you next time.
May I be excused from
You
class
can be
now?
you can be excused.
Okay, thanks.
Ready?
Hey, it's Mitch with Camera. And that's Kyle. 2 places around the world. In China! We need to send it to China!